Well, my name is Griffin ap Bedwyr. I am the Baron of Lionsgate, and I'm also a Knight of the Society, so I would be Sir Griffin ap Bedwyr, Baron of Lionsgate is official title.
I go by Falco de Dace, which means it's basically falcon or something to do with falconry.
So my SCA persona's name is Siegmund, but for the most part, Siegmund is me. I just have a different name. I talk the same, I act the same.
The group is called the Society for Creative Anachronism, or usually we call it the SCA for short, because the other name is a little long and difficult to say. The goal of the society is to recreate the Middle Ages in all its aspects, both in the costuming and the crafts, the arts and the sciences of the time, as well as the combat element of it. And that's one of the things we do. Not only do we have swords and shields and full armored combat, but we also have rapier combat as well.
My mom tells stories of me picking up sticks and spinning them around my body like they're nothing. So it's a natural thing for me to do.
Well, it's a sport, all right. I mean, it's not, you can't just jump into it and try it out and expect to do well. I mean, it takes a lot of practice, and there's a lot of training involved, and there's definitely a skill that needs to be learned, and yeah, it's a very physical kind of game. So yeah, it's a sport just like any other. I mean, it may not seem like basketball or football, but it's still, you know, it still has that physical element and then a lot of training involved. And in order to be really good and to excel, you have to be really dedicated and put a great deal of time and effort into your training. So in that aspect, it's much like many other sports.
Well, modern fencing, Olympic fencing, derived from medieval rapier, which is what we do. I don't know the dynamics behind Olympic fencing, but I know that they use different weapons. Their weapons aren't edged. They only have points. They're the épées or whatever they're called, foils, I guess. And it's sort of a touch system. That's one of the complaints I've heard from sort of medieval rapier fighters to fencing, is that it's all about touch. So a foil can bend really far, and a lot of touches will be they'll whip the foil at the guy or the other opponent, and it'll bend around the opponent's sword and tap them on the shoulder. That's a hit in Olympic fencing, but in rapier you can't do that. The swords don't bend that much.
It's fairly popular. We're getting more and more people all the time. I mean, in the Lower Mainland, we probably have around 300 people who are actively involved in all aspects of the society. I couldn't say how many are in the rapier aspect of it, but I mean, we do have a fair amount of people, and we try and get as much exposure as possible, and we do demos, and people see us around, and so we get more people coming in all the time. But I mean, it's not obviously it's not as well known as and organized as maybe like hockey leagues or baseball leagues, but I mean, we do get a fair amount of people who, it's a bit of a fringe sport, but there are a number of people who have always kind of wanted to try their hand at sword fighting. So
my teacher's my best friend. We have our whole little group. We're all good friends, and stemming out from that, everybody here has been over, and we've been to the bar together and drank and watched UFC and gotten drunk and rowdy and played Guitar Hero.
Some people, they get very involved. Some people, this is a big part of their life. I know a lot of people that, you know, we all run with our own social groups. Some people, their SCA group is their social group. That's who they spend their time with.
For the costumes, the garb, there's many people in our group that do costuming, and that's their main area of interest. So they would, if you don't want to make something yourself, then you can get somebody else to make something, whether you pay them or trade them something in return. Or you can also, there are companies, if you go on the internet, there's all sorts of companies that sell clothing, as well as the armor and the weapons and all the paraphernalia that you would need.
People make theirs themselves. I've actually bought most of my stuff. The swords are fairly expensive. It depends on how much money you're willing to spend. I've gone full out, really. My vest is $200 alone. I have a cloak that's made out of simulated fur. and that is $300.
Sword, which is just a Hanwei rapier. Hanwei's the guy who makes it. It's four parts. There's the blade, which actually goes through, down, and into here. Then there's the handle, which comes off. The pommel screws off, and then pieces come off. And this is the guard. That's basically it. It's blunted, and there's a tip on it you can see, so that you don't kill people when you stab them. But at an event, when everyone's wearing garb, it does a great job sending you back into that feel, that period. But like anyone else, you know, going to the event wearing garb, you know, stopping by A&W to get something to eat in garb feels kind of awkward.
Well, as with a lot of kind of what people considered fringy things, you know, as people kind of go, oh, that's kind of weird, you know, and it has sort of the aspect of maybe people feeling it's a bit, I don't know, D&D-ish or...
Everyone, I don't care who they are, to some degree is embarrassed when they're different than mainstream society. So when you walk into a store wearing, you know, 17th century garb, you know people are looking at you. And I mean, I wear thigh-high boots because that's the style of the rapier fighting of the period. Mm-hmm. But men don't wear thigh-high boots in our modern times, so I don't necessarily like walking around the streets in thigh-high boots.
It has that sort of stigma attached to it, and the fact that we dress up in medieval costumes kind of gives people the wrong impression sometimes. But it's really actually we're a pretty normal bunch of people. So
I would have thought, like initially going into it, I would have thought that it was 20 to 30-year-old men, and I was wrong. When I got there, I thought I would be the youngest. There was like a 17-year-old boy and an 18-year-old girl there, and then from there to 40 is a broad spectrum of people. A couple people in their 30s, a couple people in their 40s, a lot of people in their 20s. There are quite a few actually female fighters in our group. Actually, there was a female fighter. I think there's 2 female fighters that are at the top of the rapier group. They're called white scarves. The masters of the rapier fighters, they're called white scarves, and they wear a scarf on their arm to signify what they are.
Keep pushing through.
Sword arm, and then I use my left arm, and I failed.
I feel that I have a spiritual connection to my sword. So it's as much a release and a pleasurable thing to do as really just about any other thing I can think of.
I do this for the sport. I go to the events for the sport.
most people think it's kind of cool. They kind of say, "Wow, I've never heard of that before," and then once they start learning about it, they think it's pretty interesting. I mean, every now and again you get somebody who kind of goes, "Well, that's pretty strange," but for the most part, it's very positive, and people are kind of, "Well, that's pretty neat," you know. That's something that's kind of interesting, and they kind of want to come out and see things. You know, they may not get involved or anything, but they kind of think, "Yeah, it'd be interesting to come out and take a look at."
So most of them just have regular jobs. I actually heard a funny story about a guy who he's a fairly big name in the SEA in heavy fighting, and our rapier champion, or not champion, just the guy who's training us, Warwick Drakar, he ran into the guy, and the guy was working at like Foot Locker as like some sales associate, and like just some, you know, $12 an hour job, but he's like this big deal in the SEA. And one of the kings from the past in the SEA was quoted saying he was at work one day when it hit him that there's such a difference between the mundane world and the SEA world, because he spilled something on the ground, some hot chocolate mix or something at work, and as he was cleaning it up, people were stepping over him to get to the fridge, and he sort of commented on how if it had been in the SCA, and that had happened, 4 people would have dropped to the ground to clean it up for him, and another man would have come up and started to tell them about the period way to clean up chocolate powder mix.
Right.
And just sort of the difference between chivalry and our world, or the mundane world, where chivalry doesn't seem to exist all the time.